I'd like to say some very general things about international collaboration, not original comments, but based on a number of respected commentators in this area, but intersperse them with some rather more specific observations and details of how international collaboration plays out in my own university. And I want in particular to try to focus on the role that governing bodies of higher education institutions and their members might, can, and do play in helping to support and develop the international agenda of their organisations. First of all, we should note that it's nowadays hard to find anyone in higher education that would not put the international agenda at or near the top of institutional priorities. And this quote, I think, captures both the sense of importance of the international dimension, but also the sense of the complexity of this agenda and the speed with which it has been developing. It is, however, surprising how unclear the notion of internationalisation is, and I think it's worth us exploring later on. Unclear whether governing bodies of higher education institutions are engaged in this area in a way that aligns with its evident importance. This is the most commonly adopted definition of internationalisation in the higher education context. It suffers perhaps from being somewhat vague on details, and one might argue self-referential, because clearly internationalisation is a process based on some notion of an international dimension. But what is it? However, it does underscore the extent to which internationalisation is institutionally pervasive, in particular infecting the very purpose of the institution, that's to say its vision, mission and strategic objectives. And these are things that are centrally relevant to governing bodies of universities and other higher education institutions, not just to the senior management. And a question to be considering, I think, is the extent to which governing bodies are aware of institutional strategy in the area of international collaboration and are involved in assessing and developing that strategy at a level which is appropriate for its role. The higher education sector is hardly the first and only to assess the critical importance of the international dimension. However, globalisation has become almost a cliché, and it's certainly overestimated. In a recent book, World 3.0, Pankaj Ghemawat of the IESE Business School in Spain assesses that the world is at most only semi-globalised. Only 3% of us live and work outside our country of birth, only 1% of US companies have a foreign presence, and only 20% of internet traffic crosses national boundaries. But compare that with the regular business of most universities. Compare, for example, that 3% of international workers with the 35% of international faculty members at my own institution, and ask any academic if only 1 in 5 web pages they view come from outside the UK. Universities worldwide are not so much travelling in the wake of broader globalisation as leading it from the front. And if internationalisation is that critical to the institutional mission, governing bodies ought to be fully and appropriately involved in understanding the imperatives, assessing the strategy and, critically, the risks. So let's take a Cook's tour of what's on offer under the rubric of international collaboration. In trying to get some taxonomic handle on the range of activities, some authors like to make a first cut in terms of internationalisation at home versus internationalisation abroad. I won't talk about all of these, but just the first two, which I think are the more relevant in the current context. So first, curriculum and academic programmes. Here we are thinking about degree programmes or the courses that they contain, integrating international perspectives and having international relevance. I call these internationally informed curricula. We're also thinking about developing programmes attractive to incoming international students, either for full programmes or as study abroad students as part of their studies at home. We can also consider the encouragement and facilitation of foreign language learning. At my own institution, we offer free language tuition outside the formal curriculum. And under this heading, we also have the International Students Experience, support for international students, study skills, English language support, so on, foundation programmes. Now, under research and scholarly activity, we should note that academic research does not respect national boundaries in several senses. First, highly specialised scientific research does not differ much between Brazil, Botswana and Burma, but it requires a critical mass of human resource to maintain and develop it. One goes abroad in order to find like minds and similar expertise. Second, some topics are inherently international. Think about criminology or aspects of political science or literature or law. And third, there are topics that leverage resources that are only available in certain places. Think about a plant biologist in Reading who goes to Riyadh to study desert plants. Research is the glue that holds most university communities together, and as such, the international research collaboration is a very significant component in most UK universities' international strategies. Perhaps more salient strategically for governors are the activities that fall under the heading of internationalisation abroad. So let's look at movement of people. For many institutions, the recruitment of international students is a mission-critical activity, but there are other movements. There are academic staff and student exchange programmes. There are opportunities for students to take part in international volunteering work or work placements. There are often joint academic appointments, and there is the potential for exploiting the institution's often large international alumni networks. Under international projects, it's becoming more common for universities to enter into significant bilateral or multilateral alliances or partnerships with overseas institutions. An example is Warwick's partnership with Monash University in Australia. And at my own institution, we have a trilateral arrangement with the University of Constance in Germany and the Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. These are strategic alliances, and they're deeper than in the past. They aim to cover a broad range of subject areas and a broad range of activities, and they aim to build trust between institutions and formalise that trust in arrangements that offer new opportunities that would not be available to the participants alone. Peter Koklanis at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, coined the term intellectual arbitrage for this. In finance, an arbitrage opportunity is based on a difference in value of a commodity when it's transferred from a market in which it has a lower value to one in which it has a higher value. An intellectual arbitrage concerns the value of academic capacity available within one partner organisation for another partner which otherwise lacks that capacity. Such capacities might be physical resources, say instrumentation or laboratories or natural resources. It might involve access to field sites or to specialised human resources, the expertise and experience of faculty members. These complementary resources can be harnessed to create new possibilities in both research and in education. Let's look at mobility of programmes, because I mentioned the term internationally informed curricula earlier on, and the other possibility is internationally engaged curricula. Joint programmes of various types that involve students moving and engaging internationally as a design part of their studies. Academic programmes can become mobile in a variety of ways. Universities sometimes franchise their academic programmes for delivery elsewhere, or they validate an overseas provider's own programmes for the award of their degree. In addition, there are distance learning and e-learning programmes and blended versions of these. At my own institution, for example, we validate degrees offered by the Montreux School of Business, and so students in Switzerland obtain degrees from my university. This arrangement opens up excellent opportunities for student exchange within other academic programmes and for guest teaching from both partners on one another's programmes. And finally, let's look at mobility of providers. Here, it's the entire institution that becomes mobile. Typical examples are branch campuses abroad or centres, such as Nottingham's University's campus in Ningbo in China, or the Australian University of Wollongong's campus in Knowledge Village in Dubai. But other possibilities include starting entirely new institutions abroad with local providers, or, much less significantly perhaps, offering permanent offices abroad for marketing, recruitment and possibly some preparatory study, such as English language support. I imagine it's easy to see that there are many and rather different strategic drivers that would motivate an institution to pursue this broad range of activities. For many institutions, the income generation from overseas students is critical for their financial health, and this would lead them to attend to several of the issues concerning the curriculum and student experience at home, and to consider such issues as establishing permanent offices overseas. At my own institution, we have such offices in China, India, and Nigeria. But assessing the long-term viability of bringing a sufficiently large number of international students to study in the UK is behind the more recent rise of overseas operations, teaching students within their own countries, whether on franchise programmes, validated programmes, or in branch centres and campuses. It's worth noting that the number of overseas students receiving a UK university education outside the UK has been greater than the number of such students attending university within the UK for a number of years. Offering home students a distinctive education that includes an international experience, something that is well understood to raise academic standards and rates of graduate employability, that lies behind joint programmes, foreign language learning, exchange programmes, international volunteering and work placements. Excellence in research is another mission-critical objective for many UK universities, and it's well known that internationally engaged research is cited more often and has a higher impact overall. And although those indicators are not ends in themselves, they're reasonable proxies for the significance of the research. Moreover, it's simply the case that many of the most important research questions have an international dimension, and they require a degree of interdisciplinary collaboration that implies international collaboration. Each institution, then, is faced with a dizzying array of options and needs to make significant and difficult choices in adopting an international strategy that is appropriate. Naturally, this does not happen accidentally. It requires careful planning and execution. It most certainly requires a coherent approach at the most senior levels of the institution, which should include the governing body as well as the senior team. It also requires careful articulation, good communication and buy-in, and involvement throughout the institution. It also requires careful risk assessment and mitigation, something I'll come back to presently. Although the senior team has a critical role to play in ensuring coherence, the lower levels of the institution are really where the action takes place. This implies the need to balance top-level management with lower-level delegation and authority. The strategy then needs to be properly resourced. If you hadn't expected this slide, I would be surprised. The risk structure of an international strategy is complex and significant, and risk assessment and management is certainly an area for the governing body. Clearly, associated with the more ambitious international collaborations, there are significant risks to reputation and financial health. The sector is awash with catastrophes and disasters. George Mason University in the US opened a brand new campus in Ras Al Khaimah in the United Arab Emirates in partnership with EDRAC, ostensibly the local education council, but essentially a group of investors. A change within EDRAC at the CEO level precipitated a review and revision of the campus's local financial support, and George Mason University unceremoniously and ignominiously pulled out. In what might be considered the less fraught area of franchised and validated programmes, and much closer to home, the University of Wales crashed completely after a series of scandals and poor quality reviews. It's perhaps worth underlining that one of the first consequences was the chair of the University of Wales Council resigning in October 2011. But in this area, it's not simply assessing, managing and mitigating risks of specific activities, it's also about assessing the risks of not undertaking activities. At the moment in the UK, setting up an overseas campus is mostly a minority sport, but if one takes a 10-year horizon scan, what is the risk of not establishing overseas educational activities? If we assess that there will be little or no influx of students from China and India to study in the UK at that time. Finally, to sum up and to answer a question I posed at the beginning, what are the characteristics of an international university? Well, we might pull out the following key features. First, an international community of students and faculty, a firm basis on which to build activities. Second, an international offering that is internationally relevant, not just, though importantly, internationally informed, but also internationally engaged. Third, a student experience that is internationalised so that all students are international students, not just those who come to study from outside the UK. Fourth, a nexus of engagement involving the local, regional and national communities in collaboration with international partners, mediated often through international alumni. Fifth, a research agenda that draws on all the advantages of engaging with an agenda of internationally relevant topic areas and with the international community. Sixth, establishing links that go beyond the bilateral, that is, to establish multilateral alliances for specific purposes. And seventh, and finally, to take seriously our responsibilities to the international community and, where possible, to provide support and capacity through development activities. Internationalisation is, of course, not a separate activity that we add to others. It is not an extra ingredient that we add to the curry. It's like adding a spice. It gets everywhere and it changes the flavour of everything. It is subtle, though crucial. And as such, it is easy for the governing body to overlook, but it is, arguably, one of the more crucial aspects of international strategy that a governing body ignores at its peril. Thank you very much for listening.